to get people to drop jump, it's going to take 8 to 12 weeks for me to get you to a place where your drop jumps are a meaningful test. Because when they first start, they got to really master their nervous system to be able to get their ground contact below 150 milliseconds.
Dave Hamilton, welcome to VALDCAST. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for the invite.
Great. So we're here. We're at VALDCon X. We're in Dallas at Elite Performance Training. We could see we've got some workshops going on behind us at the minute. But how has the day been so far? I know you're speaking a little later today. What's the experience been like?
Yeah, it's been good. It's been it's exciting to see what you guys are doing. I love the setup. It looks very professional. For sure. It's like half an NFL field out there. So it's a nice little spot. But no, it's been a good day. I like the first presentation by Sam. I got a good idea kind of where you guys are at. Because I think the growth has kind of been exponential in the last few years.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like. So to kind of get a better idea of those numbers and where it's all at, it was interesting.
For sure. That's great. Well, few key talking points today, and I know we spoke about before we hit record. We're just going to free ball it here and see where we end up. But I think for people watching or listening, if you can give us an insight into who Dave Hamilton is, where you came from, all the way to the role you're at now in a short amount of time, which might be difficult with your track record.
No, it won't be too hard. So I started my career 25 years ago, Scottish Institute of Sport. And it was a multi-sport role where I was overseeing a lot of different athletes from different sports. And I think that was a really good first role. My first few roles are like that. So from there, I went to the English Institute of Sport for 3 years. And again, it was a multi-sport role. I was a young practitioner. So getting that flavor of trying to prescribe for a lot of different athletes for a lot of different kind of challenges within their sports was big. It was also a high workload, so you become very quick at refining your skills or finding like bang for your buck. How can you be effective? Whether it's developing templates, whether it's within prescription, it was a really good way to kind of expedite some skills. I went to Athens in 2004 with the GB sailing team. Worked with Ben Ainsley. Then I went to Aspire in the Middle East, where I did 3.5 years there as a senior strength and conditioning coach overseeing their football program, soccer. Is this an American crowd or is this a mixed bag?
I say football. I say football, but yeah.
It was with a football program.
A round ball.
It was a round ball program.
Okay.
So that was a good exposure to some long-term athlete development prescription, building out curriculums and such. And then also just a lot of all those positions with the institutes and the Aspires were very much about multidisciplinary teams. So learning how to interact, build relationships, the soft skills around communication, joint projects with different practitioner types. And that's a big part of what I think is the foundation of my knowledge base is some of the soft skills of how to work with other peoples on joint projects and appreciating people's level of expertise in their areas and how we can work together. So I'm making this long, aren't I?
You are. It's good. Keep going.
So then after the Middle East, I got a job as a head strength and conditioning coach with the GB hockey program, women's. And we centralized. So they were a decentralized program. They'd struggled to qualify for the Olympics historically. Going through a little bit of a bad run. We centralized the program and had a big role in kind of archetyping out how that program should look on a weekly basis, with them all now being full-time. We got to London 2012. We were the first British team sport to medal in 20 years.
Okay.
So when you think about the Olympics and resourcing, team sports are not the most favored because it's a lot of athletes you're having to fund and you get one medal at the end versus boxing or archery. It's one athlete, it's cheap, and you can get a medal at the end or multiple medals. So that was a big turnaround. I think a lot of what we implemented in that program then became some framework for a lot of other team-based sports. So that was a kind of a good period of time. I then, after that role, was offered a job as Director of Performance Science for the USA field hockey team. And in that role, we were able to kind of get them from a world ranking of 12 or 13 up to 4 within like a 18-month period. and then ultimately went to Rio, one of the favorites to get on the podium, and we were just unlucky, ended up finishing 4 or 5, I think 5. But again, that was a great experience. From there, I went to Penn State, where I was the assistant AD for applied health and performance science, so overseeing all 31 teams as it relates to basically taking that Olympic Institute model and trying to shoehorn it into the collegiate system. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of challenges. It was like trying to reverse the Titanic in all respects. It was a big program. But I basically just set up a lot of non-negotiables within it, like making sure there was weekly performance meetings, making sure there was benchmarking around injury prevention. There was benchmarking around the physical attributes that make athletes successful. So really just putting in big stones to then help shape better communication between departments, but also ultimately move that performance needle a little bit towards what does it take to win. Mm-hmm. And then the Bucks reached out in 2019, asked if I was interested in a position there. And that's where I've been for the last 8 years.
8 years. Okay. And still going strong?
It's still going strong, I think.
Good. Right. Well, like that was a nice quick intro to
Sorry about that.
You're good. You're good. But like in all seriousness, I want to talk about, let's even keep it England first before you transition across the water. What was the landscape like we're obviously on VALDCAST, we're at a VALD event, objective testing technology. What was the landscape like for that? Because obviously the systems like Force X and Force Frame probably weren't as commonplace. They weren't around even back then.
Yeah.
So how did you approach that? Because, you still had to get insights into your athletes, understand, am I having a positive effect with my training? And are the athletes responding to that, or do we need to change things? So
yeah, you may or may not be surprised to hear that even back then in 2003, 2004, we had FitTech technology. So we did have force plates.
Okay.
And predominantly the tests that we would do on them would be isometric pulls, iso squats. It was really a lot of that because we had a lot of Olympic lifting within our program. So anything where we could look at RFDs, peak force, that was getting done. And we would use it within our testing battery. So they may do 3RM, 5RM, 1RM squat and bench, but there would always be iso pulls in that testing battery. The other thing that I've done a lot of research on and has always been in my program would be drop jumps and using reactive strength index as an indicator of neuromuscular fatigue. Mm-hmm. Well, that was done on a switch mat. And the reason I moved to a drop jump is because a switch mat is transportable. You could roll it up or pack it up and take it to any country, throw it down on the floor, and I could have athletes do a drop jump on it. I wouldn't use a counter movement jump on a switch mat because in order to really identify neuromuscular fatigue, it turns out you needed a time constraint and a stretch shortening cycle. And so just looking at jump height as an output measure was not a great indicator of neuromuscular fatigue. So even back then, long story short, we did have tech that we would use to your point, understand almost like a plan, do, review process. We had a plan, we reviewed it, and we reviewed it by testing pre and post. And if it didn't work, we'd have to then evolve our program to kind of make sure we readdress the issues.
Yeah.
So I think I was probably fortunate as a practitioner back then that when you're working with the Institute of Sport and Olympic level athletes, we did have some of that resourcing to have some of that tech because it would have been expensive back then as well. So we did have it. Long story short.
Interesting. And then like the frequency that you're going to be doing these tests, plan, do, review. You said, what does that look like? Because it's not going to be bring them in every week or every month, perhaps. But
no, so a typical training block would be like 4 to 6 weeks. So you would retest kind of at least quarterly. So every kind of, couple of months, 3 months, you definitely do like a 12-week review. And depending on the test, you may do one every 4 weeks. The drop jumps I would do 3 times a week.
Yeah, on the switch mat. Okay.
Because I wanted to look at neuromuscular fatigue. I wanted to see the implications of practice. I wanted to see how you came into a game. So they would do jumps prior to a game in a locker room to get an indication of where they were going into.
Interesting. So I just had Mark on the podcast beforehand. We were talking about neuromuscular fatigue and maybe why you wouldn't look at a drop jump for neuromuscular fatigue and you'd look more at the CMJ. So it's an interesting contrast when you're on a switch mat. what did you...
That's the difference.
Yeah.
So that's a good conversation. I kind of I like this discussion.
I find our next talking point.
There you go, right? Because if you only have a switch mat, and I'm talking about a time constraint with a stretch shortening cycle and not being outcome measured, then the switch mat allows that. You're getting ground contact, you're getting jump height, you got an RSI. Now, the problem with a drop jump is it's a huge familiarization period. So to get people to drop jump, it's going to take 8 to 12 weeks for me to get you to a place where your drop jumps are a meaningful test, i.e. the level of variance is really refined and I'm getting meaningful change. Because when they first start, they got to really master their nervous system to be able to get their ground contact below 150 milliseconds. So Schmidt-Bleicher, back in 1990 or whatever, wrote a paper about long stretch shortening cycle, short stretch shortening cycle. And in order to really stress your nervous system, the contact has to be below 150 milliseconds, which I still think people don't do on a drop jump. Like that piece of information has got lost somewhere. So when you're getting RSIs of 2.4 on a drop jump, 2.4 2s, you are not testing your muscular fatigue. You need RSIs of like 3, 3.4, 3.6. I've seen them as high as 4.1 in divers. Like that now is enough. So when I'm hitting that ground, I am stressing my nervous system to get off that ground as fast as it can. And that's what transpires when I'm fatigued. If I work it that quick, then I start to see how it can't handle that stress. And it becomes a really sensitive marker of fatigue, way better than a counter movement jump, in my opinion, which may be worth nothing, but I have been doing this for 25 years.
For sure.
And so if you don't push the 150 milliseconds and you're constantly sitting in the 200, 225, that's not hard for your nervous system. I could do that every day of the week, whether I'm tired or not. And so as a result, it's a blunt test. And so a lot of people have said to me, the drop jumps don't work. And I'm like, well, it's going to take you 8 to 12 weeks to master it with your athletes. And then you got to be clear about what you're trying to get them to do. I told you I was going to rant about that.
I like that. So let's think about it practically. 150 milliseconds is a very small time frame. If you're dealing with athletes and you're trying to get them into a position where they understand that time constraint, first of all, and then we talk about the 8 to 12 week familiarization period. How would you practically, get an athlete to do it within 150 or less? Yeah. Because for me, with some of the, fast stretch shortening cycle below 220 or below whatever it may be, I haven't seen a lot of 150s.
No. Okay. So when you're teaching it, you typically say hot calls, get off the ground as fast as you can, but jump as high as you can. Because you can get someone to get off the ground real quick, but get no jump height, right? But I would always teach it as, once they're doing it 3 times a week, 3 to 5 reps, right? And I would always give them the feedback on the RSI. The score was 2.8, 2.7. But I'd always say it needs to be quicker, it needs to be faster. Always focus on the speed to start with. I need to be faster, even faster than that. And by default of them being faster, the RSI climbed. Just climbed, because they're not forgetting to jump. They're still jumping. I'm just demanding them to be quicker. And that's why it takes 8 to 12 weeks, because it is doable. That nervous system will do that. And once they get there, that's when this test is so clean and effective. But it does take a while. It's not like me and you could do it today and I'd get you there. But if I did it 3 times a week, 3 to 5 times efforts every time, in 8 weeks, I've done a lot of jumps, and that's it's gonna go down from 220 to 210 to 180 to 175, and then you're gonna hit the 150s. I mean, I used to get guys doing 108 contact times.
Okay.
And still doing a 40 centimeter vert.
That's impressive. Okay, so that's with those outcomes that you can get easily from a jump mat. On force plates, is it a similar concept? Or are you still looking at drop jump with just those metrics?
So I stopped doing it because
interesting.
I'm now working, you got to understand the bandwidth of the athletes that potentially you're working with. They don't want to have to go through an 8 to 12 week. Professional athletes don't want to go through an 8 to 12 week familiarization period. But also I can still do this with a counter movement jump. Counter movement jump will win because everybody knows how to dip and drive and jump, right? And there's still an RSI component to that. As I get fatigued, and this is Stu Cormack's work, as I get fatigued, it's that technical modification that transpires, right? So how you go about performing the jump, the concentric, eccentric element, or the eccentric concentric element of you starting that jump. So yeah, CMJ totally works.
Okay.
But if I really wanted to do it and I cared and I had time, my favorite would be the drop jump.
Interesting. When you talk about Stu Cormack, you're talking about FTCT. Okay, as a metric to look at.
Yeah.
Any opinions on RSI mod versus FTCT?
Not really. I'm a little bit old school.
Yeah. Okay.
A little bit old school. Again, like as you'll see in my presentation today, I'm all about keeping things simple and not getting caught up in some of the keeping up with the Joneses and more data, because more data just brings more questions. More questions just pulls more problems. And if you got more problems, that's more fixes. And if you're trying to fix a lot of shit, you're no longer looking at performance. And so it pulls you away from that.
I like that. I like that description. Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you the question in a bit about your talk today. But before we do that, let's talk about the books. And let's maybe not necessarily the books, because I don't want to get you in trouble, but let's talk about NFL in general. And it's such a chaotic sport. There's so many different body types, different positions, different playing demands, and so on and so forth. So how do you navigate that from a top down or a global approach all the way down to like the types of tests that you do? But how do you start when you're in the NFL?
Well, that's my presentation. So you want
the well, let's go. Let's just see where we go with this.
Again, for me, it's about keeping it simple. You're really talking about removing subjectivity from performance decisions, right? We got to think, you got to ask good questions. And the question is, how do we move the performance needle? If we were Jürgen Grobler, rowing coach, probably don't know him, long time ago, he would say, does it make the boat go faster? If it doesn't make the boat go faster, why are we wasting time with it? Right? We have to win. We have to win, and we have to build a performance model that helps you win. So in my mind, when I'm asked the question, like, what does it take to sustain success? It's 3 pillars. It's, I have to have the best athletes available, which means I've got to have a really good injury prevention program. I have to have the best athletes available, and I have to make them the best athlete they can be at their demands on the field, on the court, in the pool, right? What are the physical attributes that make them successful? What is considered world-class? Where do they sit, and how do I improve? And then the third piece would be when I get to game day or I get on that start line, have I put the athlete there fresh or fatigued? Because if they're carrying any level of fatigue, their ability to perform is already compromised. So if you think about those 3 pieces put together, I have the best athlete available. I've made them the best athlete they can be, and they're as fresh as they can be. And if I can do that for 69 athletes or 53 athletes, surely my chances of winning have increased. And that's all this is about. You can't guarantee winning because there's always another opponent on that field that's trying to do the same thing. So long story short, for me, it's about creating checklists, models, systems of how to take something that's chaotic and complex and make it actionable so you move the performance needle.
I like that. I like 3 only because I think we've got lost a bit, and a lot of people have their 10 golden rules. So okay, so let's go a bit deeper. When you're week to week, let's focus on in season, because I know preseason and off season can get a bit confusing. But in season, chaotic sport, very highly demanding. What does the monitoring process look like? How do you actively get insights into the athletes and their load response?
So you obviously, you're talking about, you have a plan, you understand how much work they do. We got our descriptors of load, right? Mm-hmm. The biggest piece is understanding how they respond to load. And every individual is different. And a physiological load is going to result in some kind of physiological metabolic response that we need to be able to measure. And so for us, we'll do drop jumps. we won't do drop jumps. We will do jumps, CMJs, at the beginning of the week and then pre-game. And so now I've got a marker at the beginning of the week of how the athletes have come in, and then at the end of the week of how they've responded to practice load. The beginning of the week metric is also sometimes a little bit of a dead horse because they're tired. We know they're tired. They're already tired. But what happens in that jump is you get some huge insights into imbalances that may be developing, because I got a lot of fatigue, and therefore those systems are going to be primed to show their errors. So you get insights around imbalances that may be manifesting. And then going into the game, you just got a data set that you can look at every time to see how they are generally responding. Are they in a better place than last week? They're in a worse place. And that gives you a little bit of a marker of how they're responding. We have wellness, so a subjective marker of sleep, muscle soreness, energy level. So it's a great insight into where the athletes are. And then all you're trying to do is triangulate those metrics to a point where you feel like you got a meaningful insight into how they're responding week to week. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's simple insights, right? Now you're in a place to know how they're responding.
Okay. And then as far as establishing bandwidth, I know you mentioned that. So are there is it very individualized across the board? Obviously bandwidth is an individualized concept, but how do you go about that? Because I know some people have stuck to the one standard deviation from their average, their own average. Some people have even went a bit tighter with 0.5 of standard deviation, but what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it was Hopkins' paper where he talked about worthwhile change and an elite athlete's one standard deviation may be too big, and so narrowing it down to 0.5 or 0.3 for elite populations. So I kind of sit on the 0.5 for our group. Okay. So what I'll look at with their RSI in particular is I would look to see whether they're below their typical mean or whether they're above their mean by 0.5. And then from there, you're really getting an insight into the state of where they went into that game. And then as a team, you're getting that global metric for the team and where it's how they are shaping through the season. And it doesn't lie. Like you will see when there's chronic fatigue in the team, like all the data sets start to drop, and you're going to see on every game day, there's going to be some guy that's fresh and there's going to be a few guys that are really tired. They're still going to have to play. The problem is the assumption is that you're able to control everything, which we're not. They still have to practice. They still have to earn a spot on the team. We still have limited days to get them ready. We still have physiology that requires recovery. Like there's no way we're going to be perfect. But when you get to a place that's starting to look really bad, you got to have some really important conversations before it kind of gets out of control. Mm-hmm. But the reality of working in high performance is that it's give and take, especially when you're talking about a season. It looks different in an Olympics where you might have to do 7 games in 11 days in the field hockey example. And if you don't win game 1, you're not getting on the podium. So winning becomes so finite, and you do make sure that on game 1, they are as fresh as they can be. But when you're talking about a long season, there's so many other confounding variables that are impacting these athletes: travel, sleep, load, stress. So you're really just looking for the bigger moves.
Gotcha. Have you done any experimenting with, you mentioned 0.5 is your go-to, but 0.3, 0.7, is there any point of that standard deviation, amount where you find that you're missing athletes or you're getting too many, it's too sensitive?
Yeah, I think you're trying to get too sensitive, because unless they're an athlete that does it with regularity, and I would not say twice a week is regular. There's also the elephant in the room, which is athlete intent and motivation, right? So that's where you're talking about. When you say bandwidth, you're talking about bandwidth of a standard deviation. When I think bandwidth, I'm thinking about actual mental capacity that an athlete wants to give you in a week. Mm-hmm. And when you're poking and prodding them all the time, like there's only so much you can ask of them before they tell you to piss off. So, I think their intent is a factor as well. So for us, stripping it down and trying to do it a little bit less, we may get a better data set. But at the same time, I'm not going to hone in the accuracy of that test now. In fact, I'm going to give it maybe a little bit more room to breathe. I'm going to look at the athlete in the eye a little bit, and I'm going to see the banter level is almost a bigger indicator of readiness, right?
I would agree. Do you have any strategies that you guys implement to drive intent? Some people talk about leaderboards, competition within the group, or is it different? No,
we do. So when we jump in the beginning of the week, we'll use the 4Sticks software, the original one. Mm-hmm. And then we use 4Sticks jump on pregame, because what it allows is intrinsic motivation. They see their first jump and I'll simply say, beat that. And they can see it, they try and beat it, and then immediately I'm getting more intent than that first jump. But in other days where I know they're tired, I'm not gonna poke that cognitive stress on them. You know what I mean? I'm gonna leave that again based on the bandwidth.
Yeah.
I don't want to be greedy with when I'm gonna ask you to be motivated. So 4-stacks jumps is a great software to use, everyone.
Great. And it's near and dear to my heart as well. So that's the Windows app. I think right below us, we've got someone going through 4-stacks group testing mode, which is our new and improved modern 4-stacks jump on an iPad, which is fun. So again, I completely agree with that. I think having the data there, beat that makes complete sense. Interesting. Okay. So you mentioned some of the Vald kit there. Beyond that, and this is VALDCAST, we're talking about Vald, but beyond the traditional tech, I guess, what else do you guys implement? I would assume GPS is a big part of your tech stack, but is there anything else that you're looking at?
Obviously, like you said, GPS is one. The other thing we've done and we do is we look at some biomarkers.
Okay.
So in the past, I have looked at CRP, C-reactive protein, as an inflammatory marker. I've looked at some oxidative stress. For the last 4 years, we look at free testosterone and cortisol once a week. And we get a gauge of catabolic and anabolic state. And that from there, I've gathered a lot of insights. I mean, I've looked at endocrine research for 15 years in Olympic sports and now in the NFL. So I have a good insight of TNC and the information it gives you with regards to physiological stress, how well they respond. But what's great about TNC is it's bidirectional in nature. So it can be influenced by a physiological poke or an environmental change. It can be influenced by me saying a comment to you, positive or negatively, could increase T or drop T. Mm-hmm. In the same way, when in 2009 with Christian Cook, we did the first priming study, was based on TNC and using primer as a way to influence testosterone levels prior to a game. That's where it all came from.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a useful marker.
And are you able to make interventions based off those biomarkers quickly, or is it?
Yeah, so it's acute, right? So you can, TNC can be influenced in a minute, second. Like just one comment. Everyone's felt it when a moment of stress, they get that phone call, something said, like that's a physiological response, psychophysical, like it's immediate.
Okay.
So yeah, you can affect those very quick. And so you then got to think, how can I manipulate my training environment to create these favorable hormone responses? Mm-hmm. So for example, the last thing you're going to want to do as a coach is talk about how good the opponent is 24 hours before a game, because that's going to drop your T levels. You do want to talk about how good we are at combating their strengths. You do want to talk about how good they played last week, because that will increase their T levels, which we know has an effect on cell signaling, skill acquisition, risk aversion, like all these factors.
I like that. How often are you able to test those biomarkers?
I do it in-house, so I could do it multiple times in a day or once a week. It's just costly running it, and it's a saliva-based test, so it's like a 5-hour turnaround by the time you run all the ELISAs and the essays, and
still relatively quick compared to something.
It is still relatively quick and super useful. So if you really wanted to hone in on someone, how does someone so let's take recovery modalities like ice baths. We all think we should do ice baths, right? Give or take the rationale behind an ice bath. But let's say as a recovery modality, some people like them, some people don't. And even Christian Cook's research back in, I forget when it was, maybe 2010, 12, where he looked at a rugby cohort, and they made the ice bath really cold. Nobody liked it. T levels went down. Then they made it too warm. Everyone felt like it was too warm. T levels went down. Then they hit it in the middle of about 12, 15 degrees. They all thought, this is cold. I'm tough. It wasn't that cold. It's 12, 15, which is what ice baths are recommended. That increases T levels. If it increases T, then I'm going to recover better, right?
Of course.
So that's all recovery modalities are, is if I like wearing tights because my ass looks good in them and it increases my T level, then wearing compression garments will work, right?
Okay. Yep. Now I've got a weird picture of you in tights in my head. So, okay, that's good. Awesome. No, that's been insightful. So, like, to wrap up, I always throw a similar type of question to guests, especially people in your position that have seen, quite a couple of decades of change and our industry evolving, and it continues to evolve. But for, let's just say it's an emerging practitioner coming into the world of sports science or S&C, what do you think they should be focused on right now for like the next thing? And you can't say AI. So apart from that, what should a practitioner be focused on to set themselves up for success, whether that's in elite high performance sport or it's at the Olympic level or it's anything like that?
They should be focused on the now and enjoying what they're doing and not being too eager to get the next title and the next job. Because the reality is practitioners don't spend long enough on the coalface. They don't spend long enough failing. They don't spend long enough learning. They're too busy wanting to move on and get the big pay right. Like, the reality is the fun of what we do is learning the soft skills of how to interact and influence and motivate and create intent. That's how you win, right? I can write the best programmer in the world, but if it's delivered with no intent, it doesn't make a difference. So it's really about learn to be engaging, learn those soft skills of how to interact and influence athletes. Don't be too eager to get somewhere else. Like, this is the now. This is the shit that makes a difference. This is the stuff that will make you a good practitioner. And it's going to take time. You can't rush it, right? It's a Dunning-Kruger effect where we come in after a year, we've got a degree, we think we know everything. 15 years later, you realize you don't know anything. And now you're on the journey of actually working it out. Mm-hmm. People don't get past this Dunning-Kruger effect. They immediately sit on this, I think I know it. And I'm telling you now, and I sound like I'm probably a douche, you don't. I still don't. Like, it's a journey and people just have to embrace the now.
I like that. I've asked that question to 20 guests at this stage and no one has given the exact same answer apart from AI. They all say AI. But good. Okay, cool. Well, Dave, if people want to reach out off the back of this and they've got questions or they want to dispute anything you've said or anything like that, where is the best place to do that? Where would you steer them towards?
For me, probably just an email.
Okay.
I used to, you know what? I've had an issue with Twitter. Or was it now? What's it called now? It's X.
Yes.
Can't get on my account anymore.
Okay. You blocked for
I don't know.
Bad tweets or anything?
I just can't get on. Okay. So I would normally say X, but I don't.
Oh, what's the email address to get you up?
dkhammy@gmail.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you for coming on VALDCAST. I'm especially looking forward to your presentation, which I've obviously got a sneak peek at now.
Yeah,
from
the
conversation. But looking forward to it. And again, hopefully we'll get on here and we'll chat soon again.
All right. Thank you.